Welcome. We are on week 8, or perhaps it's week 9. I just lost count. You're probably all in the same headspace I am, where you're starting to get that mid-semester exhaustion. But we'll get through it together, and we'll stay strong together, and we will surely succeed in this course. So I'm introducing inferential data today. And I'm doing this in a way where I'm just doing it to give you examples of the certain types of tests you will see in your papers, in your review papers. I will not do a deep dive into how these statistics are conducted or how this data is generated, as this is not that type of class. But I have spent a lot of time creating fictitious examples for each of you based upon the sciences that you are involved in currently. And I think I have conducted this in a way where these statistics and this type of data will make sense. So although we're not doing a deep dive into the statistics themselves, I have generated lots of examples that I think will be useful for you. So let's get into this lecture. So what is inferential data? Well, this essentially lets us make an educated guess about a larger group based upon a smaller sample size. So what does that mean? Well, we'll collect a large, there's endless amounts of data that we can collect out there in society. If I'm doing something on diabetes, well, there's hundreds and thousands of people who are diabetic. And although I can't get access to those hundreds of thousands of people to conduct research, I can get access to about 20 to 30 of them. So that would give me an N size of, let's say, 30. And what I'm going to do with that N size of 30 is I'm going to look at a specific mechanism within the diabetes continuum, and I'm going to do research that basically draws conclusions about that population, right, on that sample set of data. So it allows me to postulate and make a hypothesis and test that hypothesis on this small group of people. Right? I'm making inferences, and I can make predictions beyond what has been observed in that data set. Okay, so let me give you a quick example here. So let's say I have this bowl of soup, and let's say this bowl of soup is representing all of the diabetics, type 2 diabetics within the United States. Well, let's say I'm looking at advanced glycation end products in diabetics, and I want to see how these inflammatory molecules will bind to receptors and cause inflammation and cause things like diabetic neuropathy in people with diabetes. Well, like I said, I can't get access to all of those people, but what I can do is I can get a spoonful. So in this bowl of soup, I can't get access to everyone that has diabetes, but I can take, let's say, 40 to 50 to 60 people, and that would be represented by this spoonful. I could test them, and then I can make inferences based upon that population of people, diabetics, that I have tested. So that is essentially what this means. So we're making an educated guess about a larger group of people based upon, let me get my little pen out here. Let's just beat dead horses. This is my entirety of the group of people, and I am going to make inferences on this population right here. And let's say that population is an N of, let's say 70. So let's say at UIC, I get access to 70 type 2 diabetics who have overt type 2 diabetes. And within that 70 group of people, I am going to do muscle biopsies to determine what their level of advanced glycation end products are in that skeletal muscle. And I'm going to see how those advanced glycation end products might cause, that's a flame, inflammation in skeletal muscle. And I only have this small group of people, which is representing that spoonful. So some of these analogies are really hard to make, but I do try. I try my best to make these analogies. So when we are doing research, you all know this, I'm just going to say it because some of you might not have had research courses yet, so I got to make sure I'm talking to them as well. When we are going to form a hypothesis, we form a hypothesis to investigate if what we're observing in our sample reflects reality in the population, or if it doesn't reflect reality within that population. So we'll have a hypothesis, and this is a statement about the population and the parameter. And then we also have something called a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis. And a null hypothesis means that there is no effect and there is no difference. Okay, so an alternative hypothesis means that there is an effect or there is a difference. So let me go back to this. Let's say I am talking about diabetes again, and I say, let me clean this up. I say, I hypothesize that diabetics with high levels of advanced glycation in products, I'll say they have a high level of A, G, oh my God, that's awful. Sorry. Like I said, I'm left-handed, but I use the mouse with my right hand, so it's very troublesome sometimes. Okay, that's a G. That looks pretty good. E. Okay, these are advanced glycation end products, and they're just these molecules that float around in the blood of diabetics. They have a much higher level of them than those who are not diabetics. And these advanced glycation end products, they will bind to a receptor. So this is a receptor on a cell. This is a cell. And that AGE is going to bind here. And when that AGE binds, it's going to create inflammation in skeletal muscle. So my hypothesis is if you have higher levels of advanced glycation end products, you'll have higher amounts of binding of that advanced glycation end product to its receptor, which is called the receptor for advanced glycation end products. And as a result of that, those people will have greater amounts of inflammation. And how will I measure that? Well, I'll take a muscle biopsy, MB, and I will check that muscle biopsy for interleukins or cytokines. And cytokines are essentially these things that we can measure in the cell that basically say there's a lot of inflammation there. So if I said that is my hypothesis, okay, well, let me go back to this slide here. Come on. My hypothesis is saying a statement about a population parameter. I'm saying in diabetes, we have lots of these. These bind to cells. They create inflammation. And we're going to measure that with a muscle biopsy and see if there is a lot of inflammation with these interleukins. That is my hypothesis. My null hypothesis would be there's no effect and there's no difference. So what I'm trying to do is disprove the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis would say there's no difference between advanced glycation end products between diabetics and healthy individuals. There's no increase of binding to these receptors. There's no inflammation. And if I measure both diabetics and lean healthy individuals, there will not be any type of inflammation whatsoever. So I am trying to disprove my null hypothesis. I'm trying to say, nope, that is false. This is true. If I go back here, in my population of diabetics, I'm taking a small sample size within a greater population parameter, and I'm saying within this sample size right here of diabetics, there are higher advanced glycation end products. There is higher binding and cellular activation of these advanced glycation end products. There's more inflammation, and here's the evidence to show us that. So that is what I'm saying with a hypothesis and a null hypothesis. And here's an analogy here, and I said the null hypothesis is like the defendant. He is innocent until proven guilty. And the alternative hypothesis is the defendant is guilty, right? So what I'm saying is that this thing is true until I prove it untrue. That's what this is saying here. So I have to say there is no difference between diabetics and lean healthy individuals. But when I do my research, go back here, I do this research, I take this small sample size, I am going to say, nope, this is false, right? This is not true. It is not accurate. I am disproving that, and that's what I'm saying here. The null hypothesis, where the defendant is innocent until proven guilty. I have to prove this. We don't know the truth until I go into this sample size and I get this population, I get these measurements, and I prove, let's say I do a statistic test and I say, okay, here is my lean, healthy individuals. Here is my type 2 diabetics. And I have my X and my Y. And this, let's say that this is inflammation. And what I'm showing here is that I'm proving the null hypothesis is wrong because I have statistical significance here showing that diabetics do in fact have more inflammation because of this product. So that is my long-winded explanation of this, and you guys can take it for what it's worth. So in order to kind of demonstrate this a little more, I have a bunch of examples for you that is centered around your specific type of science. So here is my example. I should get rid of that. That is a typo. Let's just say example number 1. This would be for physical therapists, and it's talking about the effect of exercise on chronic lower back pain. So I will have a hypothesis, right? My hypothesis will be a targeted exercise program reduces chronic lower back pain more effectively than standard care. That is my hypothesis. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's accurate. I'm going to have to conduct research to do that. But the null hypothesis, remember, this is innocent until proven guilty. This says there is no difference in the reduction of chronic lower back pain between targeted exercise and exercise program and standard care. Now, my alternative hypothesis would be the targeted exercise program leads to greater reduction in chronic lower pain compared to standard care, right? This is what I'm saying. This is what I have to disprove. And hopefully this is what I find. And you guys all are very well aware that when we do exercise regimens, it is medicine and we do have reduction in pain. And this would then, we would disprove the null hypothesis, and hopefully this is what we find. And then we would run statistics to demonstrate that, this group that did normal care, actually, here, let's go this way. This group that did normal care had more pain, let's say that this is pain, reported more pain, significantly higher pain, than the group here that did this targeted exercise program. So this would prove that our null hypothesis is inaccurate and our alternative hypothesis is accurate. So let me give you another example here. So if I said example 2, effect of electrical stimulation on muscle recovery post-surgery, well, I would hypothesize, let me just go back and beat a dead horse. I have a lot of people who have pain and muscle pain, but I'm just going in here and I'm getting this group of post-surgery people that have muscle pain. And I am saying my hypothesis is electrical stimulation improves muscle recovery after knee surgery. So I'm saying that this treatment does in fact improve muscle recovery after surgery. So my null hypothesis would be electrical stimulation has no effect on muscle recovery after knee surgery. And hopefully I run a bunch of samples or I run a bunch of experiments and I find that in fact, let me just make a quick graph here. Knee recovery, I will say, range of motion of the knee, and we'll say improvement. See, this, I know that you guys use range of motion to determine if a muscle is recovering, and I've learned that while teaching you guys these types of statistics. So I'm learning quite a bit as well. So we'll say that the group that had electrical stimulation was here, and the group that did not have electrical stimulation was here. And we can see that the group that had electrical stimulation had significantly higher range of motion. Therefore, we disproved the null hypothesis, but we proved the alternative hypothesis, which was that electrical stimulation improves this recovery. All right, so you guys probably already know this, but like I said, there's some people in class that may not know this information. So now if we're talking about the effect, so this is for my sports psychologists in the class, if we're talking about effect of mindfulness training on athletic performance, I would hypothesize that mindfulness training improves athletic performance in competitive athletes. So I'm saying this intervention has an impact on athletic performance within this type of athlete. Now, I don't know if that's true. My null hypothesis is this has no impact on athletic performance in these type of athletes. So what do? I run a bunch of tests, I get a bunch of data, and I find out that if I have athletic performance on this side, well, the group that received mindfulness training, let's say their athletic performance was way up here, and the group that didn't receive it struggled a little bit. So we would see that there's significance here, and that significance therefore disproves the null hypothesis, and it proves the alternative hypothesis that, yes, this intervention does in fact improve athletic performance, and it does so within this athletic, these competitive athletes. So we now have proven our hypothesis. Let's do another example. Let's say the impact of pre-game visualization on game anxiety levels. So my hypothesis is that pre-game visualization, oh my goodness, techniques reduce anxiety levels in athletes before competition. I have this nice little series of variables here. My null hypothesis says, nope, this doesn't work. It doesn't reduce anxiety, and it doesn't matter if it's before or after a competition. None of this works. The alternative is, yes, it does in fact work. So I run those tests. I get a whole bunch of data here, and I say anxiety levels. I'll just put AL. I will see in the group that had visualization techniques, theirs might be right here, and those that did not have pre-visual techniques to reduce anxiety might be here. So we can say that, yes, there is a significant difference between this and this, right? They're significantly different, and that proves our alternative hypothesis that, yep, this method or intervention reduces these anxiety levels, and it does it in pre-game competition. And right now you're probably all saying, well, what about the exercise physiologist? What about us? You never show us any love. Well, that's not true. I have some love for you right here. So if we were looking at maybe children with disabilities and self-esteem, see, I've been listening to you guys. I've been listening to all the presentations you've been doing. I've been reading all the SJODS sheets, and I'm kind of seeing a lot of these themes and these repetitious themes kind of showing up. So you guys are teaching me quite a bit. So in the same vein, oops, let me go back. Sorry. If I am looking at the effect of physical activity on self-esteem in children with disabilities, my hypothesis, where's my trusty pen here? Let's do green. It says that engaging in physical activity improves self-esteem in children with disabilities. And my null hypothesis would be like, nope, it doesn't do anything. It's like, this is like the negative family member, right? That always tries to knock you down a few pegs. You all have a family member like that, right? Where they're just so negative all the time and have nothing good to say and kind of toxic, right? So that's what the null hypothesis is. It's just saying, nope, not true, not going to happen. And the alternative hypothesis, that's like your really chipper family member who's always in a good mood, always kind of finding the silver lining in things. They're saying, no, it's true. It's true that this engaging in physical activity will improve self-esteem. So again, you would run your you would run your tests, your interventions. You would get data, and if you had a self-esteem on this side, SE, we would see something like this, where the kids that engaged in physical activity did have an increase in self-esteem, and the people that didn't engage in physical activity, theirs would be much lower. So we would say, yep, this disproves this, and it proves this. And I'll do one more, and then we'll move forward. Here's one more example if we're talking about the impact of adaptive sports on social skill development. So our hypothesis could be participating in adaptive sports enhances social skills in children with disabilities. Remember, null hypothesis. This is negative Nancy, right? The negative null hypothesis. This says, nope, it's not going to work. Don't do it. Don't waste your time. And this is the very chipper hypothesis. Yes, this will work. We do believe in you. We believe that participation in adaptive sports will enhance social skills. So again, we're trying to disprove this, and we're trying to thumbs up and prove this. Now, if we move to the next slide, this here is talking about how researchers basically test hypothesis and this procedure of testing hypothesis. So this is a basic roadmap of hypothesis testing. And after we formulate our hypothesis, we need to set a significant value. And typically that is 5%. And this 5% basically represents a threshold for error that we're willing to accept. So we state the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. We did that, check. Now we set a level of significance. You guys know that it is always, this is the number, that 0.05 is what we're always going after. You guys have all presented on the 0.05 in class, and we know that this is, we're just saying that there's about 5% error in our research that we're willing to accept, and that's what that 0.05 actually means. It represents this threshold where if we get this if we get this 5% or this 0.05, that says, you know what we found, let me go back here. What we found with this, right, this hypothesis here, it's not by chance. It is because this intervention worked on enhancing these skills in these children with disability. So that's why we have to set this significance that we choose to work with. And then we're going to have to collect our data. So that's why I went back here. I kept saying, okay, well, we have this. We want to disprove this. We want to prove this. We're going to collect data. We hope that everything that we find is well under a p-value of 0.05, right? Meaning that there's about 5% of error that we will accept. And that means that everything we have found is not by chance. So when we set this low percentage of error, that means that what we found is that the intervention is actually increasing self-esteem, and it's not just some fluke accident. Okay? So let me go back over here. Then we're going to calculate our statistic tests. We could do t-tests, we could do z-tests, we can do all different types of statistics tests. I am going to introduce just a couple today. And then once we do that t-test or that z-test, we are going to compare the p-values to see if we can punt the null hypothesis. So if we have, let's say we do a bunch of tests and our p-value is 1.7. That is an awful p-value. And that means that, you know what, there probably is no difference between participating in adaptive sports. It doesn't really enhance the social skills of children with disability. So then we have to accept the null hypothesis. We have to say, you know what, there really is no difference here. And you guys will see that in a lot of the papers that you're reading. Most papers won't tell you that they accept or they reject the null hypothesis, but once you get these statistics and you look at those p-values, I remember last week somebody presented on a paper where all the p-values were like 0.01. It was just beautiful statistics. And then the only one that wasn't showing any significance was that diastolic heart pressure. So I think there was just one paper that had like beautiful statistics. Everything was significant except diastolic pressure, which doesn't change much. So we shouldn't see too much change in that. So this is the hypothesis testing procedure. And I showed you, let me go back to here. I say when we want to do research, there's an endless amount of people that we can pull into our labs to do research on that might have let's say we're dealing with kids that have ADHD. Okay. Well, there's probably millions of them around the world. We're here in Chicago, can only get a small percentage of those millions. So we're going to get this little spoonful here of those individuals. We are going to, let me see, where's the one with the kids? Here we go. We are going to make a hypothesis. We are going to have a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis. We cannot accept or reject any of them. We do have to set a significance level. It's commonly 0.05. We all know that. Well, then we have to prove or disprove the null hypothesis. We'll have to collect and analyze the data. We will have to run statistics. And then once we get those statistics, we will have to say, is this true or is this not true? And then we will have to accept the null hypothesis or reject the null hypothesis. So that is the basic process. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I put a little bit of a analogy here for you if you don't understand significant and non-significant values, but I'm pretty sure you all do. So let's just kind of say, if you need to read this, you are more than welcome to. I did take some time writing this. I did take some time finding this wonderful picture, but you do not have to look at it within any capacity. So let us move on. Okay, so now we're going to move into the types of error that could be made in research. And again, this is all a part of the research process, and it's all a part of what we're talking about with inferential data. This confused me a lot when I was a student, and I hope to not confuse you with this, but if I do mess this up, I have lots of examples coming down the pipe, so it should make a lot of sense to you. So researchers make errors all the time. It happens quite a bit. And we have type 1 errors and we have type 2 errors. And a type 1 error is when we reject the true hypothesis. So let's say I go back here and I say, okay, here's my hypothesis. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Good Lord. There we go. Here's my hypothesis. And I really want this to be true. And I really hope I could reject this. And a lot of researchers are really close-minded to the fact that this could be true. And they do everything they can to make sure that this is, in fact, untrue. So a type 1 error is, let's say I did my research, I collected my data, and let's say I made some mistakes in there, whether it was collecting the data, maybe some measurements were inaccurate, maybe the statistics were not right, maybe I had some PhD students or master students who just didn't feel like working that day and they collected some information inaccurately. Let's say I am working with diabetics and I told them they can't take their medication, but they did take their medication and I don't know about it and they told me they didn't take their medication. All these things can happen. I can only control the environment so much. But if these mistakes happen, they could lead me to believe that what I'm actually seeing is true when in actuality it is false. So what a type 1 error is when I accept this alternative hypothesis when I shouldn't. And that happens all the time, and we call that a false positive. Which means that the alternative hypothesis is not true. It's false. Now, a type 2 error is the opposite. It's when I reject, it's when I fail to reject the null hypothesis and I have a false negative. So let's say let's go back here and let's clean this up. Let's say I do all my collection of data. I run all my tests. I meet with all my subjects. And let's say a mistake was made and I'm like, and I don't know about the mistake. And I'm like, man, all my p-values are at a 0.19. oh, they're all so much higher. It's a 19% chance that it's a mistake rather than a 5% chance. These are too high. I can't accept this, so I have to accept this. So a type 2 error is when I accept this, but in actuality, this was true. And these are really horrible places to be in. So let me give you an example here. So I said analogy. Think of a fire alarm. Right, here's a fire alarm. Type 1 error is when the alarm is going off, but there's no fire. All right, so that's like me saying, yes, my hypothesis was true. I've proven it, but I shouldn't be celebrating because I really should be accepting the null hypothesis. And then the type 2 error is when the alarm is staying silent and there is a fire. So that's like saying, okay, oh man, I did everything I could. My stats aren't right. My data is not right. I'm going to just accept the null hypothesis and I'm going to reject the alternative hypothesis. And these are awful situations to be in. And they happen all the time. So let's talk about this in a little more detail. So I brought this one up a little earlier. We were talking about self-esteem and physical activities. And the null hypothesis was saying physical activity has no effect on self-esteem. Okay? We do our research. Hopefully we get to reject this. There's a chance this could be right. We don't know. We have to collect the data. But this is what we really want to happen. So a type 1 error, a false positive, would be you conclude that physical activity improves self-esteem when in reality it has no effect. So we're like, yes, we're going to accept this. This is true. See you later, negative Nancy. That's not true. I found significance. This is true. So that's a type 1 error. So you implement a new physical activity program for children and celebrate improved self-esteem scores, but the result was due to chance or measurement errors, right? So that's what I'm saying. You gotta be really accurate when you're collecting data, especially if you're doing primary research. You have to be really tight with data, really tight with data collection, really tight with statistics. Now, a type 2 error would be you fail to detect that physical activity improves self-esteem. So that's where you go, oh man, all that work, man, I spent so much time doing this, and now, unfortunately, I have to just accept this. There is no effect. Well, I just made a mistake. And in fact, this could be true, but because I accepted this, I will not be able to publish that this was actually true. Here's another example. So we have a hypothesis of mindfulness. I told you guys this one earlier. I gave you this example earlier. Mindfulness training improves athletic performance in competition or in competitive athletes. The null hypothesis, the negative Nancy, says, nope, there's no effect. It doesn't improve anything. You don't know. The alternative hypothesis is, yes, this does in fact work, and we got to have mindfulness training. Well, here's what that would look like if we, come on, turn for me, please. There we go. Here's what a type 1 error would look like. Here's what a type 2 error would look like. I don't know why I have an extra T there. So a type 1 error would be you conclude that mindfulness training improves athletic performance, but in reality, it really doesn't. Okay, so I have an example here. The athletes show improved performance after mindfulness training, but the improvements is actually due to other factors like better sleep habits or dietary changes during the study. So this could be another example. Maybe you didn't control for these things, but these are the things that are actually improving performance. It has nothing to do with the mindfulness training. Type 2 error would be you failed to detect the positive effect of mindfulness training when it actually does improve. So here's an example. Mindfulness training genuinely improves athletic performance, but due to small sample size, I told you that's my problem, inconsistent training schedules or poorly calibrated performance measurements, the improvements go undetected. So again, you could be onto something really novel here, but there could be other variables or other factors that you're not controlling for, and that might be impacting what you're actually seeing. So Here's one more for physical therapy. You guys can look at this. It's the exact same thing. I have type 1, I have type 2. You guys can look at that if you need it, but I think we've done a pretty good job of talking about that. But again, this one talks about external factors that you might not have controlled for, right? External factors such as spontaneous recovery or placebo effects. These could change how you're perceiving your data, but I'll let you go down that route alone. But what I do want to get into next is I do want to talk about two types of statistics that you would see with inferential data. We are going to just do basic overviews of these statistics. I'm only going to start with two today, and then next week I'll do a couple of more. So I will do a basic review of t-tests. We will look at a one group or a two group independent t-test, and that's all I have for you on this lecture. We will continue to go down ANOVAs, one-way ANOVAs, two-way ANOVAs, two-way repeated measure ANOVAs. We'll talk about those, just kind of going over what they are, but we're not going to talk about how to conduct them. So without further ado, let's talk about what a t-test is and how we can use it for our type of research. All right, so we're almost done here. Just a couple more slides. And let's talk about a t-test. So what exactly is a t-test? As researchers, we often want to see whether two things are different and if they're meaningfully different. So think of a t-test as a comparison of the mean values to determine if there's a meaningful difference. So that's why I spent all that time talking about mean values. And this is a very, very, very easy statistic that we use to do a hard and fast check to say, hey, let me go back to my example. I have these diabetics. There's AGEs circulating in their blood. They have inflammation. And I would do a muscle biopsy and measure those interleukins. And I'd say, oh, okay, here's my diabetic population. Do you need me to draw? I mean, I don't know if I need to keep kind of drawing these things. Here's my diabetics. Here's my lean, healthy individuals, right? And let's say I ran a t-test with advanced glycation end products, and I got the mean of all of those measurements. And I would say, okay, my type 2 diabetics are here, and my lean, healthy individuals are here. So if I look at my advanced glycation end products, I would say, okay, the mean values between the type 2 diabetics are much more significant than the lean healthy individuals. Lean healthy individuals have lower amounts of advanced glycation end products. And then I would say, I'd go one step further. I'd say, okay, I want to do a hard and fast measurement on inflammation just to see if these two might be correlated, right? And we did correlations last week. So now I'm saying, okay, well, are advanced glycation end products correlated with inflammation? And I hope it's a positive correlation and a strong correlation, right? A really strong R value. Well, then I would say, okay, well, here's inflammation, and here's inflammation in lean, healthy individuals. And I would say, I'm just going to say I for inflammation. And I do a t-test, and the mean values of the inflammatory scores are much higher in the diabetics right here than the mean values in the lean, healthy individuals. So then I would say, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. What would I do then? Well, then I would reject my null hypothesis, and I would accept my alternative hypothesis. You see how all this is kind of working together? There's an analogy. I don't know if you need it, but it's there. It checks whether any observed differences are statistically significant or could happen by chance. So that's the kind of main theme that we're talking about here. Here is the formula for a t-test. We are not going to do this, but this is for a one-group t-test. So a one-group t-test compares the mean of a single group to a known value or standard. So here's an example. Does a new exercise program raise heart rate above a resting average of 60 beats per minute? So this would be, so it compares the mean of a single group. So let's say I want to work with children, and I want to compare if exercise raises heart rate above resting average, right? Here's the resting average. Well, in children, that would actually be higher because children have higher resting heart rates. So that might not work, but let's just say for sake of argument, I have a known standard and I want to compare a group to that known standard. I would collect the data, and my hypothesis is yes, this exercise program does increase heart rate. My null hypothesis is no, this exercise program does not increase heart rate. And my alternative hypothesis is yes, it does. So I do a bunch of tests, I collect data, everybody collects data, I get the mean averages of all these children. Let's say I have 30 children total, an N of 30. And let's say I run a t-test, I do a one group t-test. Well, if I take that one group t-test and I compare it to this mean of 60 beats per minute, here is that known standard. And my exercise group, let's say, is up here. Let's say they're at 90 beats per minute. Well, this is heart rate, right? I'm taking here's my heart rate. I'm taking a mean of a single group, children, to a known value. And I'm saying, yes, in fact, this is true. I can accept my alternative hypothesis and I can reject the null hypothesis because exercising in children raises heart rates to 90 beats per minute versus 60 beats per minute. This is the known standard right here, 60 beats per minute. So that would be a one group t-test. And a one group t-test is like comparing your new cookie recipe to a famous store-bought one, right? So I have this new recipe that I want to make, and then there's this store-bought one. The store-bought one would be the standard. And you're asking, is my recipe really better or am I just being biased, right? So I can't just say, I think that exercise is going to increase heart rate to 90 beats per minute. I actually have to go in and do the research and collect the data, and I'll do a hard and fast one group t-test. I'll compare it to a standard, and I'll say, well, yeah, it does in fact raise the heartbeat above 60 beats per minute. So that would be a one group t-test. There's now a two group t-test. Well, this makes a lot of sense. This compares the mean of two different independent groups. We're not dealing with anything that has to do with a known standard. We have two groups. It could be diabetics versus healthy, right? Two independent groups, and I'm looking if mean values between these two populations are equivalent, or that's an equal sign, or different, right? That's what I'm looking to do. Or I can say, we can go back to our sports psychology students. Does mindfulness training improve focus more than no training, right? So I have two groups. I have a mindfulness group. I have a no training group. Let's say I have an N of 20 in each group. I will figure out some sort of way to measure training. And hopefully what I see here is I have two groups. I talk about, does mindfulness training improve focus? So I'm looking at focus. I'm comparing focus. And I see that the group that receives mindfulness training, I run a hard and fast t-test, versus the group that does not receive mindfulness training. There's a significant difference in mindfulness training. So then I run my t-test and I see that the mean values between this group and this group are much different. So therefore I could accept my alternative hypothesis, right, that H1. And I can say, yes, in fact, mindfulness training does improve focus more than non-training. And then here's just another analogy. So a two-group t-test is like comparing the performance of two different soccer teams. Are they equally good, or does one outperform the other under similar conditions? So that would be an example of t-test. Now, of course, I am going to have lots of examples for you. And we can go through some of these. I'm not going to go through all of them because you have them and you can read them. So let's just do one per group. So here's one, and here's one. And what I've done on this whole thing is I've given you a hypothesis, I've given you a study design, I've given you how a t-test application would work. And this is on exactly what we talked about earlier today, effective adaptive exercise on physical fitness levels, or influence of group exercise on social skills, or these are for my exercise scientists here, or where's my other one? So impact of physical exercise activity program on self-esteem. So we've talked about all these. I keep reintroducing them. So let's talk about this one. So we're talking about the influence of group exercise on social skills. So my hypothesis, group exercise sessions enhance social skills in disabled children compared to individual exercise sessions. So I'm comparing two different groups. I'm comparing group exercise to individual exercise. Okay, and my hypothesis is that yes, this enhances social skills. So this is what I want to work. So my null hypothesis would be group exercise has no effect on social skills. So the study design, so I made up this fictitious study design. An exercise psychologist recruits 50 disabled children and randomly assigns them to two groups, right? We're doing a t-test. We're doing a two-group t-test. One group participates in group exercise, got it, check, while the other engages in individual exercise, check, for 8 weeks. Okay, so the t-test application. Social skills are assessed using a standardized social skills questionnaire. I have no idea what they're called. I just threw it in there. Before and after the intervention. A two-group independent t-test is performed to compare the changes in social skills scores between the two groups. Okay? And this helps to determine if the group exercise leads to greater improvements in social skills. So I did the best of my ability to kind of graph this out for you. So I did a t-test. You could see before and after. So this would be the group exercise, and this would be the individual exercise. So I'm comparing this group to itself. So here's the values before, here's the values after, and you can see that there looked like there was a nice increase in social skills. And the individuals, well, they look like they also had an increase in social skills. So I put the graph details here. Each, you can read that. There's error bars. And the other thing I could do is I can compare this post to this post, right? So, or I could compare, well, that would be it. I wouldn't want to compare the pre to the pre. So if I also wanted to look at another way of running a t-test, I can say, okay, well, I'm going to take the mean value of the group exercise post-intervention, and I'll take the mean value of the individual exercise group after the intervention. And you can see here that, I'll say social skills, as social skills really doesn't look like there's any significance here. There's really not much difference there. So what would I have to do? Well, I would have to get a percentage. Let's say my p-value was, I'm just making this up, 0.12. Well, that is not a pretty p-value, so I would have to reject my alternative hypothesis, and I would have to accept my null hypothesis because there's really no difference here between these two groups. Let's look at another one. I didn't forget about my sports psychologist folks. Here's one. Here's another. You can look through this. Here's a third one. Let's do this one because I did some statistics on this. So we're looking at the effects of team cohesion on individual performance. Our hypothesis is higher levels of team cohesion lead to improved individual performance in team sports. So that would be my alternative hypothesis. Yes, in fact, this team cohesion does have an impact on individual development. That's great. My null hypothesis would be like, nope, team cohesion does not have any impact on individual performance whatsoever. So I have to figure out which one of these I'm going to accept and which one of these I'm going to reject. So my study design, a sports psychologist assesses team cohesion levels using a validated questionnaire for 20 sport teams. I don't know what questionnaires you use. I'm just doing my best to make this real. Each team's cohesion score is correlated with individual performance metrics. So for a t-test application, the psychologist categorizes teams into high and low cohesion groups. So we have two groups, high cohesion, low cohesion. Ideally, we hope that the high cohesion leads to our alternative hypothesis that says this is going to improve performance. That's ideally what we want. So we are going to categorize them into high and low. We're going to look at the mean scores and compare the individual performance scores of athletes in each group using a 2-group independent t-test. Okay, so I get all of this and I plot it out, and this is what I get. Low cohesion, high cohesion, and over here I am looking at individual increases in performance. You can see that there is probably a statistical difference here between low cohesion and high cohesion. So this would then suggest that yes, I get to accept, let's say we get a p-value of 0.03. That's a pretty p-value. Well, I made my hypothesis, I recognized the null hypothesis, I set a standard of 0.05, I went out and collected the data, I ran the statistics, I did a hard and fast t-test between the 2 groups, and lo and behold, I found that there is a significant difference. I get to accept the alternative hypothesis, I get to reject the null hypothesis, and that is all she wrote. I also have some information here for my physical therapist. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to just kind of put it there for you. There's 3 different scenarios. You guys can look at it. That is all I have for you today. I will be back shortly to provide another lecture, probably on Thursday. So having said this, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.